Authors Over 50, Writing in Life's Sweetest Third. Authors Over 50's weekly podcast celebrates writers and their journeys to publication. Writing after 50 is a whole story on its own, so let's skip to life's sweetest third and talk with authors about their journey from pen to publish. Welcome. I'm Julia Daly, your host, and I invite you to listen to interviews with writers who've achieved their goal of publishing a book just later in life. We've seen award lists for under 30 or under 40, but I've yet to see lists for those who've achieved a significant milestone of their own, launching a new career and publishing their first book after the age of 50. We will hear about these authors' inspirations, struggles, strategies, and the smell of that first book. These writers' journeys inspire me because I'm one of them. My guest today is an award-winning author born in the Midwest, raised in Washington, D.C., and now makes her home in rural North Carolina. She's the author of Accidental Birds of the Carolinas, Searching for Virginia Dare, and a new novel, Indigo Field. And all her works reflect her fascination with Southern places, history, and people. She lives on a century farm with her husband, Sam, and dog, DJ, where she mentors writers and reads poetry to trees. Welcome to Authors Over 50, Marjorie Hudson.
Thank you, Julia. It's so good to be here.
It's great to have you here. Our opening question on Authors Over 50 is always, what took you so long to write your first book?
Oh, my goodness. Well, that's a whole story. I know I started out as a journalist. I was in college and did not take any creative writing classes. You know, a lot of people get their start with that. I did not study much literature, but I was a reader. And I was working my way through school as a waitress, and it got my attention that I needed to make money to, get by in the world. And so I didn't follow that dream because I knew it was so risky. So I ended up being an editor of a national nature magazine in Washington, D.C. It was my dream job. I loved it. I got to read about national parks and write about national parks and do advocacy. But I was sneakily doing my fiction writing workshops on the side. So every once in a while, I would sneak off and write a short story or something. But it wasn't until I moved to North Carolina, rural North Carolina, more than 30 years ago, that there was a sort of a transformation in my writing life. I was living on this ramshackle farm with a friend. I was kind of burned out on city living, and I just fell in love with the place, with the whippoorwills and the frogs mating in the pond and skinny dipping and all those things. And I just had a personal transformation. And I also had a transformation in what I could do with my free time as far as writing. I was freelance writing, but I could play around. So I started writing poetry. And one of the jobs that I lucked into was a freelance job copy editing books for Algonquin Books of Chapel Hill, who's this formidable, publisher of great novels, many about the South. And this was early days for them, and I got to know some of the authors and just fell in love with Southern literature and started studying up on the side, which is something writers have to do anyway. It's good to have that journalism background because you know how to seek things out. And I started reading all the big, long, shaggy books of Faulkner and Eudora Welty and Flannery O'Connor. And I fell in love with those ways of grappling with big issues. It's a lot of the Southern novels really do have that big field of play. And I really admired that. And I I wanted to someday do something like that. And I remember one day I was working on a novel manuscript, and in those days, you saw big wads of paper, and you would turn the page. And I turned the page, and I said, you know what? I have a story idea. And I whipped around, turned on my computer, and started to write a story. So that story I sent out, and it won an award. And I said, whoa, maybe you're pretty good at this. You need to write more. So I balanced my, editing and my writing, creative writing for a while. I took more workshops. And one day my husband said, why don't you just take a year and try to write a novel? Um, and I knew it would take concentrated time. So that's what I did. And I did all kinds of other things on the side. I sold at a farmer's market and did a lot of community work. I'm the kind of person who can't just sit in her room alone all the time for an entire year. And so I started working on a completely different novel and drafted that. That is a whole other story, but it's not the novel I ended up publishing first. Um, so that's the story. At some point, I had a moment when I realized I wanted to write that big, shaggy Southern story with the moral questions and the character transformations. Those are the kinds of books I most admire. So um, uh, there's a lot more to the story because around the time I started really thinking about writing this big novel, I wanted to write about my community, transformed by fiction. And I wanted to write as an outside observer, a Yankee in the South. I was a born again Southerner. I mean, I just completely jumped in, and I had Southern accent mentors and everything, but I knew that I was an outsider. And there's something about, I think all fiction writers are a little bit of aware of themselves as outsiders, but I had that stance where I could see all the different communities I was part of that were separate from each other without having had a personal history with any of those communities. I was seeing them fresh and seeing how they related to each other. And I wanted to write a novel about a community in the South that encounters the past sins. Um, and of course, that turned into Indigo Field. It took a long time to write that, and it had all kinds of kind of three different themes going. But I learned a lot, and I'm glad that it took me this long to write, about 30 years, because I learned so much about life, as well as it gave me time to do a lot of research, and it gave me time to do the really intensive layering for a multiple voiced novel, a community novel. And I learned a lot about life and was able to fold that into my character development. So that's the short version of the story.
So many of us at this age say that we couldn't write the same story if we had written it in our early years. So I think we have a lot of hindsight and a lot of wisdom that we had to place in these books later in life.
Yeah, I agree. Much to my surprise, I'm a lot smarter than I used to be.
Well,
So,
you've received some very powerful accolades for this novel. How did you find and ask those novelists to blurb your book?
well, first and foremost, I love the blurb from Sue Monk Kidd, and that's a fun story. We actually knew each other from writing workshops years ago, and it was a summer writing program that we went to in the North Carolina mountains, and we would do funny skits together. And I noticed her work, I said, that's interesting what she's up to. And I think she noticed mine. So we kept in touch a little bit over the years. And when she published The Secret Life of Bees, I went to a reading, and I was working with my local library at the time and invited her to come and be part of a community read. So we were back in touch with that. And then we kept in touch, and she was always very encouraging with me, with my work. And so I was very shy. It is a tricky thing to ask someone to write a blurb. I said, look, we're friends for life. Do not, no matter what your reply is to this. So just know that. But I think you're the right person to write a blurb for this novel because of your writing about the South and how there are these big, moral shapes that you're interested in all of your work. And so she said yes, and I was just delighted. No, she wrote that it was mesmerizing and had a sense of redemption in it, and that was high praise. She's a good blurb writer. And then there are other Southern writers that a few of them I had met or knew or had been in MFA with, and workshops with, because I've been at this so long. I knew a lot of writers, and some of them were just people whose work I read, like Rose Gwynn is a quintessential Southern writer, and we're Facebook friends. And so I got in touch with her because she works in very similar areas. I like her aesthetic and her sense of character, and the moral arcs in her story are really interesting to me. And I'll just mention one more, and that was Lolita Tatamy was a wonderful Oprah author. She writes about her own Black heritage and Native American heritage. And so I thought, whoa, she'd be great. And I had met her briefly at a writing retreat place that I was a few years back, and I had read some of her work and said, she'd be great. She's not going to remember me, but I'll just write one of those embarrassing emails that says, you're not going to remember me. She did remember me because I reminded her we had exchanged a page or two of work. And I reminded her when she asked me what my book was about, I said, it's about how ignorant white people are about Black people, which was just a really strange thing to say. But it was also about my own journey as a white person in the South. I grew up in Chocolate City, Washington, D.C. So there have always been Black people in my life, but something shifted. History is personal in the South. And something shifted about my understanding. My understanding became personal as I started working in my Black community with various projects. So she got that. She remembered my foolishness, I guess, and remembered the pages I sent her. And I was very grateful to have her comments. So.
It's a real celebration of the quality of your work to have these novelists write such high praise for you.
Yes, and I'm very grateful. So grateful.
Margie, tell us about what the title means.
Yes, I was hoping you would ask that question. Indigo Field is the name of a place that is not its true name. Its true name is Indian Field. That's the vernacular name that local people gave. And it probably has a Tuscarora name that we don't know, but the local grove of trees there have a Tuscarora name, Tanachawihi Jiri. And there's it points to a theme, which is that in historical record, of course, it's the white people who write down the story. And sometimes they don't know the true story, or sometimes the story is hidden or only told in oral history and kept secret in certain ways. So there is a whole element and theme of how the name of this place became repressed and was covered up by this new name, Indigo Field. Plus, I really like the words indigo and field. So
I worked with the Craftsmen's Guild of Mississippi for many years, and I always love to hear that word indigo because I had some fiber artists who worked with indigo, and it's really a fascinating process.
yes, it is. And, you know, if you're looking at kind of subtext, the indigo dyeing process, of course, came from, in this country, came from enslaved people brought to work indigo fields. And so it has a little bit of a shimmer with the past history, a little nod to past history. Yeah.
Well, once you finished this manuscript, how did you proceed? Did you search for an agent, decide to use a hybrid, a small press, or did you self publish?
I decided to go after an agent and go for traditional publishing. It was a zigzag route because I had, by this time in my life, many friends who were willing to recommend their agents or provide introductions. And um, my novel was long. I recently taught a workshop and gave a talk about my book process and to some writers. And I put up a slide that the lengths for different genres, how many words for different genres. And then the next slide in my PowerPoint was, this is not what I did. So I wanted to write one of these big shaggy novels that had a kind of an element of the saga. You know, it goes back 300 years of storytelling and history, where it's also got, you know, 6 point of view characters. And there was a lot to weave together. And what I got back was, yeah, it's too long. And also it's difficult. It's about racism. So I'm a very stubborn person. I felt like I had something I really wanted to say, and I wanted to say it beautifully, and it would take a little bit longer than a genre novel. Um, but I kept cutting. I did keep cutting and sending. And the most recent agents I sent to they were all very kind and interested, and they loved the writing. But the most recent one said, you know what? Things are changing here in New York, and I cannot even find publishers for my current clients. I can't take on somebody new. So that was heartbreaking because this was an agent I'd researched. I thought, yes, this agent is going to be my best friend. But there's a lot going on in New York, and of course, you know, as of last week, Penguin fired 90 or let go 60 of their top editors. So I just happened, my submissions happened to coincide with this period in New York that's difficult. And I said, you know what? I published with small publishers before. There are really fine ones out there. I think that's the way to go. So I made a list. And the first one on the list was Regal House Publishing. And when they came back and offered a contract, Janie Royal is the publisher, and she called me up and she said, "We want to offer you a contract." She's from New Zealand, and I don't have her accent right, but I'll try. And I said, really? Are you sure? Are you sure it's not too long? Because I've been hearing that over and over. And she said, no, I like it long. I like it just the way it is. So, I adore her for life. This publisher, Regal House Publishing, has a couple of really fantastic advantages over some of the other small publishers that I was considering. And one is that it creates this sort of very collegial relationship among its writers. I've gotten to know a lot of writers. I've recommended it to writer friends. Also, they have relationships, very useful relationships with top agents so that I don't need to have one. And they have actually pitched the audiobook and sold the audiobook, be coming out in the fall. They have a top agent pitching movie rights. Almost every time I talk to a book group, they say, has to be a movie. And I say, I agree. And then we all talk about who should be the leads, and Tom Hanks for the Colonel. And anyway, so they also are selling overseas rights, foreign rights, which I've been an observer working in the business for a while, and I know that most writers really make their main money from those kinds of rights sales. So, I'm very hopeful. We sit around waiting for a call from Hollywood, and that would be fun. And I like to fantasize about it, but that advantage is really unusual. So I really appreciate this publisher.
That's really great. And working with a small press is so much more personal, I think, than a big
Yeah.
house. And I have media agents in Hollywood who are taking my books around to different studios. And of course, just like I had books coming out during the pandemic, my studios have now closed for the writer's strike and for the actor's strike out there. So you have to always wait, and you always have to have hope, but there's so many things, so many working parts.
Yes, ride that elephant. You just never know in this business what's going to happen next. And, that makes it more exciting when something really great happens. And as writers, I think we have fantasy lives for a reason. It's useful in the writing process, and it's also useful to help keep you going when times are tough.
It's
It's not
very
always
true.
easy. Yeah, yeah.
Well, why don't you tell us a little bit about the passage you've brought to share today and then read from it so we can hear your tone and voice in the book?
I'd be delighted. So this is from the opening of the novel, and it introduces the place, Indigo Field, and its kind of neighborhood in the rural South, and it introduces the first of three main characters. Tucked between the Cedar River and the monstrous pines of the Gouly Ridge lies an ancient field, tangled and wild, knee-high with last year's scrub, strewn with rocks the size of crouching men and sleeping deer. Its soil is deep and loamy. It has been planted, but never plowed. It is spring, and up on the ridge, a breeze lifts the broad crowns of the Gouly pines, releasing yellow clouds of pollen that float across the highway and come to rest on every flat surface of Stonehaven Downs Retirement Village, including the hood of Colonel Randolph Jefferson Lee's new Honda Accord. West of the ridge across Spill Creek, the breeze raises wild bees from the hollow heart of Miss Reba's sycamore. The bees rise up from that dark cove of sweetness, hover over three strange cedar statues in the yard, then head across the creek and through the woods. They pause over Jolene Blake's tidy fields, then glimmer up the Gouly Ridge and gather among the old pines, humming. The Gouly pines have lived through drought and flood. They know the glaze of ice and the glimmer of sun on their cracked, cupped bark, each scale like a small ear alert for sound. The giant trunks sense the movements of vast oceans. They taste the breeze and know a storm will rise along the coast of Africa. They listen to the stories of the field. Colonel Randolph Jefferson Lee, retired Army, prepares for his daily run, which he's lied about for months, telling Anne he will stay in the neighborhood, he will call her on the cell if he gets in trouble, and he will keep it down to a stroll, a slow walk, no running. Rand glances guiltily at Anne sitting at the kitchen table, her fluffy, just washed white blonde hair, her head tilted in that funny way of hers, peering through her fancy reading glasses at the paper. The lovebirds chatter in their cage next to the window. Anne's deep into her morning routine, looking out the window now with pursed lips, something on her mind. He wonders sometimes if she thinks about Malaysia, their last posting, and all that happened there. But now she turns to the lovebirds at their cage, lifts the latch, and that mischievous grin, that morning joy, is back. God, she's a beauty. How did he ever catch a woman like her? By pretending to be a man who belonged in a place like this.
That's lovely, Marjorie.
Thank you.
I love when writers use place as one of its characters, especially those places that I know so well personally. And I could see all of those characters and all of those scenes that you were describing.
Thank you. I hope that when people finish reading this book, they might be driving down a country road and see a field and say, I wonder what secrets are buried there. Yeah.
That's so true. And you were talking about outsiders being an outsider in the South, and that's pretty much anywhere you go, because I now live in Texas, and I've been told unless I have ancestors in the graveyard that I'm not a Texan.
That's right. That's right. It helps if you raise a child where you move to. And so I did that here. And, I know about that thing about introducing yourself by somebody's daddy and so forth. And my husband grew up around here, and his granddaddy was a preacher at the such and such church. And so I have that all down, but people could tell I'm not from here.
Okay. Well, after you published the book, have you found any publicity that's worked or that didn't work post publication?
That's a great question for writers to, it's challenging, right? To get attention out there. I think, I have a publicist, and she's really helped organize a book tour and events and podcasts. Thank you, Hannah. And also, kind of enjoying being online and having, online reviews. But my secret weapon has been my local bookstore, my local independent bookstore. Shout out to McIntyre's Books and Peter Mock. I have been taking my books and business to them for 30 years, and I have supported them and brought people to read and brought people to buy books there. And when Peter read this book, he decided he was going to promote it. So he started sending out books and contacting bookstores and contacts around the country. And that was so moving to me. And they have a wonderful facility there. It's an old dairy barn that they use for weddings. And he elbowed his way in and said, you're not having a wedding this weekend, you're having Marjorie. So, I think independent bookstores can be just the heroes of a book tour and of book support. And I'm calling this the grassroots book tour. So I've been at it a while. I have friends all over the country, and I connect with them and making new friends all the time who are writers, and having conversation partners at stores that are new to me, and staying the night with folks. And, people don't talk about that much, but a book tour is a chance to connect. It's a chance to reconnect. And also, I think that the podcasts are pretty great. Meeting all kinds of great people and learning a new territory for me. So
Well, it's pretty new to all of us. I didn't know what Zoom meant until the pandemic, and now we can Zoom in all around the world and reach
yeah,
audiences that we never would have locally. But I love that independent bookseller recommended you so highly. That's high praise because they read so many books.
yeah, yeah. I feel very grateful for that. Yeah.
What about any specific books or seminars or writing retreats or groups that you could share that improved your writing journey?
Gosh, well, years ago, I went to the summer writing programs in the mountains of North Carolina. And the one I went to was called Wild Acres Writing Workshops, and studied with some very fine writers and got to know colleagues that stuck, that stayed with me over the years. Also was very lucky. They had a continuing ed program in creative writing at Duke University in a place they called the Bishop's House. And there was this great porch, and I just vividly remember learning from really great writers in the area and folks I've kept in touch with from the workshops and who've taught the workshops. So those things helped keep me going until one day I said, you know what, you just are going to have to do an MFA. And I had waited long enough that I was able to, have some money saved up to do that. It's hard for younger people to do MFAs. So Warren Wilson College and the MFA alumni have been incredible ongoing support, workshopping this novel and sharing my news and just lifting up each other. Writers need people to talk to and a writing community. So that's helped a lot. Yeah.
Do you have any other books in you?
I sure do. Golly, like 30 years ago, I made a list of all the books I was going to publish, and there were nine. And I did a count before I came on the show. I said, okay, you have three unpublished, three published. That's six. You have two researched. One of those you set aside. One of those you're going to pursue. And then I'm thinking, maybe some sequels to this big, shaggy Southern novel. But the thing I think I might do next is a novel in stories about some research I did about American artists in Rome in the 1850s. That to me is such a fascinating time. And I learned about it when I was doing research for my Virginia Dare novel. And it's not a novel, it's creative nonfiction. And I want to go back. I want to find a way to go back and live in some kind of hovel in Rome and haunt the streets and learn about the marble carvers of Rome.
That would be a great place to go and do research.
Yeah, it sure would.
What does writing success look like to you personally?
I've thought a lot about that. And, everybody kind of wants to have a lot of people read their book, but I think it's best to focus on every moment, every encounter with a reader, especially in person encounters, is an extraordinary moment. Don't you feel it's just a moment where we connect across spiritual and physical boundaries and know each other's minds? And that moment, the moment where somebody tells you that they stayed up all night or, that it helped them really rethink some things. those kinds of responses keep a book alive. So the idea that a book is alive in the world and that people are telling you something from deep in their hearts that connects to what you created, that's writing success. And I try to remember that every time I get into ego territory, which is never quite the right place to be in this business. So
I agree. My favorite part of writing my books has been hearing from those readers who, as you said, just stayed up and devoured the book and reached out to me and about, the topics I was writing about. And they weren't friends, they weren't family, they were strangers from across the planet. And it's just a humbling and honoring of our work. And it's going to be out there forever. We don't have to rush. 6 months after the book is out, people are going to find these works for years to come.
yeah, that's a great feeling. It really is.
Well, as always, our last interview question is our writers over 50 are quite a unique group. Do you have advice for writers 50 and above?
I sure do. And it's sort of a concentrated form of the advice I give to my students and all writers when I'm talking. And that is to find a community. You may have been at this in your mind, kind of hoping for the day when you could write the book of your heart for a long time. And it does take that kind of lonely process, getting the words down on page. But you'll need to take a workshop or have a writing group and bond with people that will be with you on the journey. And just remember also that you have a special perspective and wisdom to offer that more and more, I think, is needed in our world and in literature and art. And, you have special knowledge that you bring to the rest of us and a perspective that has a little wisdom to offer. So, as I say about my dog, she's aged to perfection, like a good wine. So I think a writing idea or a story can really benefit from that process of fine connection with a period of time that mellows and enhances the flavor of your work.
So true. And our writing community is so generous, and we reach out and we try to help others. And I've never been in any industry that was so generous with advice. And so we just appreciate your being here with us today and sharing your journey. And we look forward to reading your book. And now we're happy to say that you're counted among our authors over 50.
Thank you, Julia.
Thank you for joining us today. Please look for Authors Over 50 every Thursday when we will have conversations with accomplished debut novelists over the age of 50. Please subscribe and share with a friend. And check out my own publication journey after 50 at www.juliadaily, that's DAILY, like dailynewspaper.com. Until next time, keep reading and writing. And remember, it's never too late to fulfill a dream in life's sweetest third.